All right, so the first technique that we're going to learn today is the most basic of the watercolor techniques. This is called a wash. So I'm going to get some water on my brush, and I'm going to spin my brush in a color. I'm going to use red. Okay, and make sure you're just spinning your brush and you're not like mashing it in. Okay, after I've got some color loaded up on my brush, I'm going to pick a section. I'm going to start here. You can start wherever you want. And I'm just going to wash a certain portion of my shape, but not the entire shape. A wash is just filling in your shape with color. So I'm going to start here on the edge, work my way around, and I'm just going to do a portion of this shape and filling it back in with color. You can always add a little more color on your brush and go back in to that shape. So we're actually going to talk a little bit about value here too. So you can make things darker with watercolor as well. So this is going to be our darkest right now. We can always layer another layer on top of it to make it even darker. But if you wanted to make it lighter, I'm going to go in, I'm going to dip my brush in the water and scrape it once on the side. And I'm going to start down here, and this is going to be a lighter version of that color. You want to do this all while it's still wet. And then I'm going to scrape or dip and scrape one more time, and this should be an even lighter version of that color. So the more water you have on your brush, the lighter your color is going to be. So this technique again is called a wash, and it is also a value range if you add more water to your brush and less color. Okay, let's do something a little more fun. So this next one is the closest that you can get to erasing with watercolor. This technique is called lifting. So whenever you are lifting, you're gonna get a color on your brush. I always recommend a cool color with this because it shows up a lot better. So I'm gonna spin and get some purple on my brush. I'm gonna just start here for lifting. So I'm actually gonna get a lot of color on my brush because I'm gonna do the entire area. All right, so I'm gonna paint this whole area, and watercolor is a very time-sensitive medium, so you want to make sure that you're always getting a little more color, a little more water in your brush. You have a brush that can hold a lot of water. And while this is still wet, you want to make sure that you have a paper towel. While this is still wet, I'm going to get a paper towel, and I'm going to kind of get it in a random shape. I'm going to press down and lift up. And I should probably have gone a little faster. Press down and lift up. And that's called lifting. I'm going to show you another lifting technique in a little bit once we get to another kind of technique. Okay, so the next one is another fun one that uses salt. Okay, so with salt, this is another one of those techniques that you should work pretty quick with. Salt absorbs the watercolor, so what it'll do is it'll make this really neat effect where it's kind of like speckly. A lot paint on my brush. Okay, this is another one of those that you want to work pretty fast. So I'm gonna go pretty quickly. Lots of water, lots of color. Don't let it dry, don't let it dry. Okay, now I'm gonna take a little bit of salt, and you really only need a pinch. And I'm just gonna sprinkle that around. And you're not gonna see the effect right away, but you'll see it here shortly. That's probably all I want. If you use too much salt with this technique, it tends to just clump up, and like this right here might not do what I want it to do. But if it's spaced out enough, you're gonna see this really neat effect start to happen here pretty soon. Okay? All right, so we've gotten wash. It's also a value range. we've got salt, and we have done lifting. Okay. So the next thing that we're gonna do is what I call a layered glaze or a layered wash. This is one that you come back to a few times. So I'm gonna start with I like to usually use a lighter color with this, so that way you can see the effect of it later. So I'm gonna start with this like gold type of color that I've got going on here. And I'm just gonna wash the entire area with color for right now. Let's move that out of the way. So I'm just gonna start here. I'm just gonna start on the side. I'm just gonna pull it with me going a long way. Okay, so we're just gonna let this one dry. And we're gonna come back to this one later. Again, this one works really well with lighter colors or warm colors, okay? Next thing is wet on wet. This is a really fun technique. This is one that I like a lot. I used to call this like a tie-dye type of technique. This one works really well with either secondary colors or colors that are in a row on the color wheel. So any analogous colors, okay? So any 3 in a row. So for this one, I tend to work with cool colors. I think that always looks really good. So I'm gonna just start by getting just clean water on my brush. This one you can actually do with just clean water. You don't need, I could clean my water out right now, is what I'm saying, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just start this, and I'm just gonna add a ton of just water on my page, okay? This one can pool up a little bit. Just remember that the watercolor will only go where it is wet on your page. So make sure that you're steering clear of other wet areas while you're working. So I'm getting my page really wet. Okay, and while I'm working, I'm gonna go ahead and get some water on my brush. Don't wanna wait too long. So here's some purple. It's gonna look really cool. Let's go with some blue next. No, not enough color. Unless it's too wet or too dry at this point. What's this? Some green. Definitely need more of like a blue in there for sure. There we go. It's a little better. It's pretty cool. Okay, so I've got a kind of a mess going on here, and I'm going to show you one more of that lifting technique real quick. I'm going to take my paper towel. Actually, I'm going to do a different area. Okay, so I'm going to come over here. I'm going to get my paper towel. I'm going to kind of twist it up like this, and I'm going to kind of suck it up like a vacuum. Start to suck up that section. Especially really, really wet areas. It'll still let it stay in the page, but you just want to get it so it's not such a big mess, more of a controlled mess. Be really careful if you're using primary colors, because remember, colors across the color wheel will make brown unless you're going for like a murky brown. So if you make like, if you have red and yellow next to each other and they make orange and then you add blue into that, that'll make brown. So just be careful with that. That should fill in. Okay, so that is wet on wet, and another lifting technique that we used in that as well. Okay, so this other technique is using plastic wrap. This is a really cool one. You can kind of see that salt effect starting to happen there. All right, so this is, I'm gonna use plastic wrap. This is another one that's really cool with, you could do wet on wet and the plastic wrap, or you could just do a wash with some plastic wrap on there too. Let's go with this color here. It's like a dark purple. Okay, so I'm gonna wash this area. All right, and while it is still very wet, I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna stick some of this plastic wrap on there. And you're gonna let it dry. And all these little areas that are touching is gonna leave a really neat effect, okay? All right, so there's that one. I'm gonna leave that one there like that. Okay, wet on dry, we're gonna do wet on dry. Wet on dry is basically, it's wet paint on a dry page. So with that, I'm gonna do that one just like over here. This one you can, if you are looking to like draw with watercolor, you can hold your brush a little more like a pencil with this one. But you can also just use it to fill in a section. So like this could have been wet on dry, like a wash is wet on dry. A lot of these techniques you can use in different ways. Okay, so with wet on dry, this is one where you could kind of draw with it. This could be a design, this could be whatever you're looking to do. I'm just gonna do mine over here. So if you're holding it a little closer, it's one where you could just kind of add in techniques to it like that. And then if your brush is pretty wet for the area that you're painting, it's pretty wet, you can always go in and charge it with another color if you're interested in that. So I could like take another color that's close on the color wheel. I can touch it there and see how it'll start to fill in some of those sections. It's called charging, so charging it with color. You could even blow it. And it'll move along the wet area that you've got. This works better if the line that you're drawing on is still really wet. Since I didn't have a ton of water on my brush, it didn't move too far. It's kind of like a wet on wet technique in a wet on dry area. All right, so I'm gonna go back and do another layer on my layered glaze or my layered wash. I'm gonna use the same color that I used before, that kind of gold color. Okay. This time I'm not gonna go all the way to the edge. I wanna leave a little room so you can see that just by layering the same color can make it darker. So that can change the value as well. So even if that's your darkest, you could always go back in and make it a little bit darker by layering it with the same color. Okay, and we'll go back in one more time and layer it again. Okay, another technique is, this is an old one that I've loved forever. This one is called blooms. Blooms are where you wash an area, You wait a certain amount of time, and then you come in with clean water and you drop it onto the page. And what it should do is make this effect where it kind of pushes the paint away. So remember, whenever you're using watercolor, this page is not like a normal piece of paper. It's actually made of cotton. And so what it's really doing is it's staining or absorbing that color into the page. So what you're doing with that is you're not letting it set all the way, and instead you're using that clean water to push away that color before it can fully absorb into your page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a color. I usually like to do a darker color with this as well. So let's go back to some blue, really dark blue. All right, so I'm going to get that on my brush. I'm going to put that on my page. I don't want to use too much paint. This is another one of those time-sensitive processes where if you wait too long, it doesn't work. But if you don't wait long enough, it doesn't work either. So if you're successful, that's great. If you're not successful, that's fine. You have time to practice and get those down. Okay. All right, and so while it's still wet, things will still absorb nicely. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to let it dry a little. I'm going to clean my brush. And it usually takes about as long as it would take to sing happy birthday, or about 15 seconds or so. If you see your page in the light, you want it to be shiny, but not runny. And you don't want it to be all the way dry yet. So now I've waited a little bit of time. I'm gonna just kind of touch my brush to the page, or you can actually drop the water. This is a little more controlled. If you touch it like that, if you touch it there, you'll see that it starts to go. And I'm not gonna go crazy because I want you to be able to see the effect. So I'm gonna just kind of let this one do its thing. Again, this is an organic process. This is something that just kind of will happen. So let watercolor do its thing, okay? All right, so the next technique we're gonna do is droplets. So droplets are, I have these little pipettes that look like this. Okay, and what you can do is on one side of the tray of your watercolor set, you can actually mix the colors on that tray if you would like. That way you can start having a custom color, a color that you like that is not in the actual set just based on the base color. Okay, but with these watercolor droplets, what you can do is you can get water and you can mix it in on your tray, making sure that your water is clean, of course, and you can mix all that stuff together. But what you can do also is you could take some of the color that you already got, if you already have a color that's mixed, or you can take a pre-mixed color, one of these that are already made. You can get that in the pipette, and carefully you can use that to droplets. And the more you have for each section, the bigger the droplet will be, of course. And again, you're going to want to make sure that they that you're controlling it. Okay, clean your pipette out in between. Get clean water in it, squeeze it out. And you can always do multiple colors. So I can go back in with another color now, and I can add different dots around here. You can always mix them together as well. Okay, so that's little droplets. And then the last one that I'm going to show you before we finish our last layer here, of course, is we're going to do a controlled splatter. Usually what I would do is I would kind of cover an area where I'm going to do that splatter with paper towel or extra paper or something. So that way I don't make a giant mess over here. There's a few different ways that you can do this. I'm going to just use a color that's dark so that way I know it'll work. You don't want it to be dripping wet. I'm actually going to scrape my brush a few times on the side here, and there's a few ways you can do it. You can either take this and you can kind of tap on the top of it, or if you want to take it, you can always gently spray it like this Just kind of bring the brushes towards you and let go, and it'll make a controlled splatter effect. You don't want to go too crazy with it, or else it just looks messy and out of control. Okay, so that's a controlled splatter technique that you can practice. Again, I would highly recommend taking something and covering up your sections, so that way you're not making a big mess on your work that you've been working so hard on. Okay, last thing we're gonna do is just that last layer on our layered glaze, or layered wash. And then again, this is just how you can make the darkest version of that color. And there we go. All right, so we have a wash or a value range, okay? We have our layered glaze, lifting, salt, plastic wrap or saran wrap. This one is wet on wet, so wet paint on a wet page. And as you add those colors in, you are charging that area with color. So wet on wet and charging, if you'd like to label it that way. Wet on dry, I added the charging into this as well, so that's where I showed you charging initially. This one is blooms, and you can see how that kind of worked there. This one is droplets, and this one here is a splatter technique, or a controlled splatter technique. All right, good luck with everything. Let these dry. All right, we'll put this stuff on the drying rack. Let this stuff dry. Don't worry about lifting it all up right now, unless you have a giant pool of color happening. Then you're good to lift it up. But until then, let this dry. We'll put it on the drying rack. That's all for now. See y'all later.